Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Andy. I hope you're doing really well wherever or whenever in the world that you are. If you're new, welcome. It's good to have you. And if you're returning, hello again. It's nice to see you too. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps support the channel and me. In today's video, we are going to be talking about all the books that I read in January. I had a pretty excellent reading month in January this year, and I read 22 books. I'm very proud of myself. Now, many of these books were quite short. If you haven't already watched it, I did a reading vlog where I was reading the shortest books on my TBR, and it went well for me. I loved every minute of it. All that to say is that despite some of these books' lower page count, I really enjoyed myself. I had a ton of 4.5, and 5-star reads this month. There were a few like meh books here and there, but all in all, it was great. I had such a good time. And I'm like so excited to keep this momentum going in February. So let's jump into the books. Just as a heads up, I'm definitely not gonna go into the premise of any of these books. I feel like I just wanna share with you kind of my overall reading experience, my impressions, the things I liked, the things I didn't like. If you're wanting to know the summary of what any of these books or book series is about, go look it up on Google, Goodreads. It'll do a better job capturing that information than I feel like I ever can anyways. Otherwise, I get too clunky and I feel like robotic when I'm trying to remember the synopses. So this is just gonna be me sharing my overall thoughts and feelings about a book. The first book I read in January was The Wedding Crasher by Mia Sosa. I loved this book. I gave it 4 stars. I thought the fake dating trope was done excellently. I loved both the main characters, and I was worried when I picked this up because I feel like a lot of people had been saying that they didn't like this one as much as this author's previous book, like the first book in this little companion set. But man, I loved it. I laughed out loud. I grew really attached to the characters. There was, a few moments where I was like kind of rolling my eyes, but because I liked the characters so much, I really didn't mind it. I'm like mostly thinking about some of the miscommunication or lack of communication stuff that happened. Even though that's one of my least favorite things that come up in romance books, that did not deter from my love of this book. I also, immediately after finishing this book, I texted my mom and my sisters and I was like, great, so we immediately need to go eat Brazilian food, because the descriptions of the main character, I think her family owns a Brazilian food market, and just like the descriptions of Brazilian cuisine were mouth-watering. And we went to a restaurant near us and 10 out of 10. It was so good. I loved every minute of it. So it helped bring this book even more to life. I think my only problems with this book is, like I already mentioned, like there was some miscommunication, or like, why aren't they just saying what they really mean and how they really feel? Like some of that stuff went on throughout this book. There's a few like kind of cheesy, ridiculous moments, but I liked those moments. I just know they might not be for everyone. There weren't many steamy scenes throughout this book. In fact, there might have only been one, but the one that we got was wonderful. So, you take quality over quantity, I guess, in this one. All in all, I loved it. I highly recommend, and I can't wait to read more from this author in the future. The next book that I read in January was A Guide to Being Friends, a guide to being just friends. I received an e-ARC audio copy through NetGalley, and I was very excited. It was my first audiobook ARC situation that I had ever experienced, so I was really excited. I really loved the premise of this story. I love like a classic kind of friends to lovers trajectory. However, I didn't love this in the end. The first thing I want to say is that I didn't realize when I requested this book that it was the 3rd book in a series of companion stories. And this is a book where I actually feel like it would be beneficial to read the previous books. A lot of things would come up casually throughout this third installment, and there was characters that would pop in, or they would make reference to things that obviously happened in previous books, and I felt really disconnected and out of the loop, and I just didn't feel like I knew what was going on with a lot of the side characters and some of the dynamics. And I think that might have been one of the reasons why I wasn't super invested in like the main male protagonist. He just was so flat and kind of uninteresting to me, and I didn't think that he had a super well-established character arc. He did and said a lot of things that frustrated me, and so yeah, I'm wondering if I had read the previous books, like maybe I'd have more context to who he is as a person, and maybe that would help me connect with him a little better. I don't know. I didn't care for him that much. And also, I didn't care for the female lead too much either. She also had some character traits that just irked me a little bit, and I feel like there was a lot of miscommunication stuff going on in this story. I just was so disappointed. There were some things I enjoyed though. It wasn't like a total miss. I gave it 3 stars. I really enjoyed the audiobook narrators. I really liked the overall premise. And I think if you've read and enjoyed the previous books in this little series, I think you'll probably really enjoy this one. I'm not even sure if I've said the main characters' names, but the girl is Haley and the guy is Wes. I did really love the real genuine connection and friendship that these two characters have at the beginning. Like that I adored. I thought it was very charming and sweet. So I think overall for me, it was just kind of an okay book, middle of the road. I think I could definitely see myself still picking future works up by this author, just maybe sticking to books or series outside of this specific little companion set. The next thing this is kind of like something that I read throughout the month of January. Every night when I'm going to bed, I always put on like a comfortable audiobook. It's sort of like my version of white noise. And in January, I re-listened to the Ravenels series by Kleypas. I love this series. I love the audiobook narrator. The more I listen to them, the more I enjoy them. I still think my favorites are definitely Marrying Winterbone, which is the 2nd book, and then Chasing Cassandra, which is the 6th book. They're definitely my favorites. I think because they have kind of like grumpy, rough around the edges heroes, and kind of quirky, shy, not spinster leads, heroines, but like kind of. I love those 2 books in particular. I just love the relationship dynamic, but all of the books are so fun. I love all of the cameos you get from all of the characters. They're just delightful. They really are. Yeah, so throughout the month of January, I listened to all of those books, and I loved it. I loved it. The next thing that I read in January was The Keeper of Lost Things by Ruth Hogan, and this was our book club book for Broad to Book, and I liked this book, I think, more than other people in our book club. I thought this was a really sweet, kind of whimsical, charming story. I liked the little elements of magical realism that you get throughout the story. I thought how a lot of the storylines ended up connecting at the end felt really satisfying to me. I thought there were some really sweet characters. I liked some of the relationships that came through the story, both platonic and romantic. Overall, I really enjoyed this. I think I gave it a 3.5 stars, but on Goodreads, I rounded it up to 4. But I will say some of the feedback that was discussed or some of the criticisms that came up in our book club discussion. One was around the pacing. I think some people found the pacing to be a little clunky and a little off. I didn't mind it so much, but I know people felt differently about the pacing. The elements of magical realism did not land for everybody. I think some people wanted it to be more fleshed out and like wanted more to be explicitly brought to light with like certain magical kind of things that popped up here and there. Again, I liked it as it was, but that was definitely some thoughts people had. There's also, the beginning of the story is quite confusing. There's a lot of different voices that you meet. There's a lot of changing POVs. It feels a bit non-linear. So the beginning is a little bit of a jumbled, like, what is going on? And then by the end, everything kind of fits together and it makes sense. But I know people struggled getting into the book at the beginning too. So overall, I think it was a bit of a mixed bag. I liked it more than others. So I think if you've read this author's work before, I think you'll probably like this book. If you like kind of those quirky, whimsical, non-linear style of books, I think this is a really fun one to pick up, and it's short. So I listened to the audiobook and enjoyed the audiobook, although I do feel like the audiobook also had mixed reviews. So, you know, if you do read it, let me know what your thoughts were. I liked it overall. The next books or like series or bind up or whatever you want to call it that I read was the Mindf series by St. Abbey. I loved this. I was so addicted. I could not stop reading this. I devoured it. I was so invested in this girl's life, in this story. I thought it was so fun, and it was not at all what I expected it to be. And man, it was good. If you don't know, all I'll say about the premise is that you follow a female serial killer as she kind of meets and connects with an FBI agent investigating serial killers. There is so much tension throughout this book, both like sexual tension and also like plot tension. It is so addicting. I think if you're ever in a reading slump, try this first little book. I think the first one is called The Risk. That's what I read in the reading vlog from January. Oh man, it was so good. My sister is reading it right now, and she was like, this is the craziest thing I've ever read. Also to note, there's a lot of dark content and themes throughout this little bind up. So if you're sensitive or mindful of that, please look up the content and the trigger warnings, because there is a lot of graphic stuff on page. There's a lot of stuff alluded to and described very explicitly. And so definitely, if you're, like I said, sensitive to that, please look up the content warnings, because I don't know that this little series is going to be for everyone, but it was definitely made for me. I will say the only thing to put out into the world before you pick this up is a lot of the FBI profiler jargon and like categorizing of people and diagnosing, like that is unrealistic and problematic at times. But if you can kind of just suspend disbelief and just ride the ride, it is so fun. It's so worth it. I also found the ending very satisfying. Like I was really not sure how I wanted the story to come to a close, and the way it tied together, like I loved it. I wouldn't change a thing. I already can't stop thinking about wanting to reread it. It was so good. As a whole, this little bind up gets 5 stars. It was great. The next few books, I'm not going to speak on too much in this little video. I do have a reading vlog where I read, like I said, my shortest books on my TBR, and these were the books that I read during that video. If you want my thoughts kind of as I was reading and upon finishing, go ahead and watch that video. They're all spoiler free. The short version is I loved every single book I picked up. I picked up The Risk by St. Abbey, that first little novella from that series. It was great. I think I gave the first book 4.5 stars. Then I read Open Water by Caleb Azumah Nelson, and I loved that. It was beautiful. It was probably one of the most poetic things I've read in a really long time. I think I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibbert. That book to me was just like perfection. It was everything I wanted it to be. It was sweet and heartwarming and funny, but also had space to kind of talk about and explore more complex and complicated things in life. I loved it. If you haven't read it, you absolutely should. I think this is Talia Hibbert's like YA debut, and it was gold. It was gold. I love everything she writes, and this was no exception. I also, in that vlog, read Frenchman's Creek by Daphne du Maurier. This is like a very like PG-13 pirate adventure book. There's like a little romance, a little danger. I think it's technically a classic, But it was a fun time. It was a really good reading experience. I really enjoyed myself. Also, the audiobook is done by none other than Davina Porter, who is one of my favorites. I love her so much. I think I have a video from earlier on about my favorite audiobooks, my favorite audiobook narrators. I'll put that in the cards above. But man, Frenchman's Creek was fun. And then I finished that little vlog off by reading Memphis by Tara M. Stringfellow. It was beautifully written. It was quite emotional. I was very moved by the end of the story. It follows different women within the same family, and I thought it was a really powerful, emotional, wonderful read. It was so good. I think I gave it 4.5 or 5 stars. So that little weekend reading vlog was a smash hit. Because I liked the Mindf series by St. Abby so much, I learned that she actually writes under several different pen names. So I picked up another series of hers. This one is called, oh wait, I'm forgetting what the series is called, but the first book is For Psychos. Her pen name here is Kristy Cunning, I think. And this was a really fun fantasy romance series. I read books 1 through 3. I haven't finished the 4th book. I will say the first book was by far has been my favorite. I loved that you're kind of learning the world as the main character is. It just made it so fun. I loved uncovering all these little puzzles and mysteries and kind of figuring things out with the main character. I just thought it made the world more exciting. As things become revealed through later books, I still enjoyed the 2nd and 3rd books, but I enjoyed them a little bit less each book. This is a reverse harem series, but I don't want to say anything else because I do think it's good to go into this particular series pretty blind. Because like I said, that first book, it was really fun to just be like, what is going on here? And oh my God, I didn't see that coming. So I think I'll definitely finish the series. I'm just not totally sure when. But yeah, the first book was definitely my favorite. Let's see, the first book I gave 4 stars to, the second 3.5, and then the third 3 stars. Each sequel I've liked a little bit less, but all in all, it's still a fun time. The next book I picked up was The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee. And this was fun. It was recommended to me because I love the Veronica Speedwell mystery series. I've heard that this book and this series is very similar in tone and humor. And so I was very excited going into this. And it was okay. My biggest problem is like, I did not love the main character, Monty. He really aggravated me. I didn't find him as endearing as I think you're supposed to. The romantic relationship that he's kind of like pursuing throughout the book, the whole time I'm like, you're not good enough for that other guy. So like, I didn't love the book. The mystery was also a bit underwhelming for me. My favorite character was honestly Felicity, who is the sister. And so I might continue on in the series just so I can read. The next book is like her story. It's her POV. So like maybe I'll read the next one, but we'll see. We'll see. I'm not in any rush. Overall, I gave it 3 stars. The next book that I read was Secrets of a Summer Night by Lisa Kleypas. This is the first book in the Wallflower series, I think. So many of her series have like connecting characters. And so I read this first book and I had deja vu the entire time I was reading it. And I couldn't tell if that's because nothing about the plot or the characters felt fresh to me, or if it's because I've literally read this before. It's totally possible I read this before I tracked my reading on Goodreads or in my reading journals or like started YouTube. So I don't know. It was so familiar the whole time. It was just an eerie, it's kind of a weird reading experience. I will say overall, I gave this book 3 stars. I felt pretty lukewarm about Simon and Annabelle's relationship. I also thought this book, like the first third and the last third, felt like completely different stories. Like there was something about the arc of this book felt disjointed or just didn't work for me. Now, I did love getting introduced to all these, like this little wallflower group of friends, and I'm particularly excited for the third book in this series, which is Evie's story. You know, even though this was just an okay first book, I'll definitely keep like listening. I'm listening to these books on Hoopla. I'll definitely keep listening to them. Spoiler alert, I'm actually on to this second book. It's sort of my current nighttime listen. I've had to reread chapter 5 like 9 times because I keep falling asleep. So this is why I can't listen to books for the first time before I go to bed. My sister's watching this and she's probably screaming at the camera because she hates when I do this because I complain about it all the time. Anyways, so that was Secrets of Summer Night by Lisa Kleypas. It was fine, 3 stars. The last book I'm going to talk about in this wrap-up video is I finally finished The Women of Chateau Lafayette by Stephanie Dray. Overall, I gave this book 4 stars. Here are the things that I really liked. I loved each of the 3 female points of view, each of the 3 characters. They were each very distinct and unique and really complementary of one another. I was very interested in each individual character's unique plot lines and how their lives and stories kind of connected later on. I thought the audiobook narrators were wonderful, and I really appreciate and recognize the tremendous amount of research that went into writing a book like this. The author's note at the end really highlighted where a lot of her research was, the historical accuracies, and then the places where she was able to take more like fictional liberties, hence why this book is historical fiction. Although she did call it something different. She called it biographical fiction, and I think that that is such a good, appropriate genre for this book. I think the only reason this didn't get a higher rating for me is the pacing. It took me so long to read this. I alternated between reading the ebook and listening to the audiobook. I think the audiobook really helped me like stay engaged and keep going, and doing it together, like listening while I was physically reading, was perfection. But I do think something about the pacing didn't feel quite right. And just like as a personal thing, the storyline that is in the 1940s, like World War II, just really stressed me out, and not in like an exciting, I'm on the edge of my seat way, in like a, it made me nauseous and like, did I want to continue kind of way. So, but I think that's totally like my preference. I don't think everyone is going to feel that way. Overall, I thought this book was incredibly well written, and I'll definitely think about picking other things up from this author. Maybe if she's writing like other biographical fiction stuff, like if I can find historical figures that I already have some information or some recognition of, like that might be really fun. If you all have any recommendations for other books by this author, I'd be so curious. Yeah, I love dipping my toes into some genres that I don't read super often. It was one of my reading goals, was to read more historical fiction, and so I'm glad that I got this read. All in all, it was a really fun, fast-paced reading month in general. I read a lot of series throughout this month. I know I didn't talk about like every specific book in every series in this space. If we did, I would just be here for like 100 years. So I just tried to condense it a little bit. Let me know what you read in January. Let me know if you read any of the things I've picked up in January. I'd love to hear if your thoughts were similar to mine or different than mine. If you made it to the end of the video, go ahead and leave, maybe leave a little snowflake emoji, because January is wintry and cold, and it has been quite blustery and windy and cold in my neighborhood lately. It's freezing in my apartment despite my attempts to make it warmer. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video soon. Bye.